Just so you know, this show is about scary stuff. So don't say I didn't warn you guys. And remember, don't be scared.
Episode 73, Super Predator. War Baby here with another episode of Murderous Minors. By the 1990s, the myth of the rise of the so-called super predator was devised and perpetrated across the land, frightening legislatures into drafting juvenile laws which would have consequences for decades, even up until now. The 1980s had seen a sharp and dramatic increase in the rates of juvenile crime, mostly in line with the rise of the crack cocaine epidemic. The super predator was a child criminal who, according to political scientist and criminologist John DiIulio Jr., lacked all evidence of having grown up in a civilized and normal society. They have no empathy, impulse control, conscience, or regard for life.
A super predator is a young juvenile criminal who is so impulsive, so remorseless, that he can kill, rape, maim without giving it a second thought. We're talking about a group of kids who are growing up essentially fatherless, godless, and jobless.
He wrote of children evolving into bands of roving teens who could remorselessly rape, injure, and kill, with a smile on their face and emptiness behind their eyes. These are the images which help pave the way for tough-on juvenile crime laws, many of which required mandatory life without parole for crimes committed while under the age of 18. We adopted the adult crime requires adult time mindset, as if anything that vague could be used as an actual parameter. I mean, once a child does it, can it still be considered an adult crime?
There are no violent offenses that are juvenile. You rape somebody, you're an adult. You shoot somebody, you're an adult.
John DiIulio would later backpedal on his theory, but it was far too late.
The super predator idea was wrong. Once it was out there, though, it was out there. There was no reeling it in.
As we know, the U.S. Supreme Court's decision in Miller v. Alabama made the automatic sentence of life without parole unconstitutional for juveniles, to be reserved for only the most heinous of crimes and the most irredeemable of children. Their decision in Montgomery v. Louisiana made that ruling retroactive, allowing a multitude of juveniles across the country the chance for resentencing. Although the Miller decision is pivotal, one can't discount the importance of Montgomery, since its decision was necessary to force states to change their laws. This week on Murderous Minors, we examine the crimes and sentences leading to those precedent-setting decisions, beginning with the 2003 murder of Cole Cannon in Moulton, Alabama. The father of three was 52 years old and had just moved into the trailer park where 14-year-old Evan Miller lived with his mom and siblings. She had substance abuse issues and their dad was violent. He'd kicked his sons with steel-toed boots, and Evan's sister would later state that he wore a heavy belt buckle, mostly to keep it handy as a disciplinary weapon. She said that for a time, Evan had a semi-permanent imprint of the buckle on one of his buttocks. He worked as a truck driver, Evan's sister said, and she herself had been tasked with housekeeping duties when she'd just started school. Ill-equipped, she and her family lived in a nightmare environment, teeming with roaches and filth. He'd once made the children watch him kill a kitten for having an accident on the floor. The family often went without food and electricity. All nearly died once after using a grill indoors for heat exposed them to toxic carbon monoxide fumes. Other shocking incidents included their mother being held at gunpoint on more than one occasion, as well as Evan's brother being protected at gunpoint by a neighbor after fleeing the family home in fear. The children lacked mostly everything, including basic necessities, supervision, structure, and discipline, and lived in a home documented to be riddled with neglect and abuse. Evan Miller first attempted suicide at 6 years old and would attempt 3 more times by the age of 14. By the time Evan, his older brother, older sister, and mother moved to the country living trailer park, he had finally been doing better in every way. In school and in his home life, and only because the kids had just spent 2 years in foster care, being raised in another family. They'd been hammered with terrible stories of what happened to kids in foster care so that they would be too afraid to ever admit the truth about what went on at their home. But there were violent clashes and beatings, and it didn't take long for child services to intervene. Their mother never pursued criminal charges against their father, but after Evan's sister was left with a noticeable bruise to the eye, on the day before attending a summer camp run by child services, the siblings were finally removed from the home. There were 19 incidents documented with child services pertaining to the family, starting before Evan's birth and ending when he was 10 and removed from his parents for the next few years. A foster sister would later state that the siblings were much more welcoming of their love than any of the other kids who'd ever lived with them. They were just hungry for it. Although records indicate there was a violent altercation between Evan and his foster sister, when she was asked as an adult, it wasn't an event that she recalled. When it was time for the kids to be reunited with their mother, who had split from their dad while they were in foster care, Evan didn't want to go. In reality, no one but their mother likely felt they should be returned to her care, but she did what she needed to in order to regain custody. Once back home, all 3 kids and their mother started partying. Not hard to do since the trailer park housed several like-minded individuals. The family's social worker documented that Evan and his mother came to meetings while under the influence. He was diagnosed with conduct disorder and ADHD, as well as substance abuse issues. In the summer of 2002, after having been back with their mother for a few months, Evan went to live with his father in Indiana. Things were rough, however, and Evan ultimately left around his 14th birthday in November and returned to Alabama. His father had hit him. Before letting him leave, however, they'd had a paternity test done, and it was determined that he wasn't Evan's father. As one can imagine, this information had a detrimental effect on Evan's ensuing behavior and evolving psyche. Once back in Moulton in 2003, he began to commit petty thefts and hang around with kids bound to get him into trouble. He had friends, and one particular friend, 16-year-old Colby Smith, was staying over on July 15, 2003, when Evan's neighbor Cole Cannon came by to use their telephone. Cole had only lived across from the Millers for a few weeks and had been having issues connecting telephone service to his home. 52-year-old Cole Cannon was a regular guy struggling to get back into control. A drinking problem had helped derail his life, causing him to lose his house and move into that trailer park. While he was preoccupied, Evan and Colby snuck to Cole's trailer and looked for drugs and other belongings they could steal, noticing his baseball card collection, remnants left from when he had owned a shop. Several hours later, around midnight, Cole returned, having burned his dinner, and Evan's mom made their neighbor some spaghetti. The boys went back and stole the cards and returned to Evan's trailer. About 2 hours later, they went back, and Cole was visibly intoxicated at this point, around 2:30 a.m. The trio drank alcohol and smoked marijuana, a plan set by Evan and Colby to get the man intoxicated enough to rob him. The 14-year-old would later remember having taken 2 benzodiazepine pills, Klonopin specifically, and drinking whiskey. Evan stole almost $350 from Cole's wallet, but as Colby tried to put it back in his pocket, the older man woke up. Colby hit him with an aluminum baseball bat, and Evan continued the assault on the floor, hitting Cole multiple times in the face with closed fists. Evan continued the assault with the bat, and his friend would later testify that he pulled a shirt over his neighbor's head and proclaimed aloud that he was God, and he'd come to take Cole's life. Throughout the brutal attack, Cole begged them to stop, asking why they were doing this to him. With their victim still alive and moaning, clearly in pain, they took off home, but returned to try and clean up the crime scene. Each boy attempted to ignite several fires, one in the back of the trailer, one in the front, all the while Cole Cannon lay injured in the hall of his own home. Colby would later say he had regrets and left a water faucet running to try to put out any fire that started. But the smoke eventually alerted neighbors, and responding crews arrived around 6 a.m. on July 16, 2003. They noticed blood on the walls and coffee table and stumbled upon Cole lying on the floor. He had been murdered, and his cause of death would be determined to be blunt force trauma, broken ribs, and smoke inhalation. Officers spoke with neighbors and recovered the stolen baseball cards from Evan's mother, then brought them in to be interviewed about the events of the previous 12 hours. Evan Miller's juvenile criminal history was fairly non-existent, with 2 documented incidents of truancy and 1 of second-degree criminal mischief. When Cole's relatives had arrived at the scene of the fire, they said Evan was trying to take off in a truck with 2 others but didn't make it. At first, he attempted to say he hadn't seen or heard anything between the time Cole had left his home after using the telephone the night before and the arrival of fire crews the following morning. But when the detective asked him to go through the events in reverse, he became flustered and requested that the 2 of them be left alone. Evan then shared that what he'd said before was a lie, and that the truth was to follow. He admitted to stealing the baseball cards and going back in the middle of the night when they knew Cole would be drunk. Evan claimed Cole fell and hit his face, and that when he tried to help the older man up, he was grabbed by the throat and struck with that bat, leading to the deadly altercation and aftermath. But he did not admit to setting the fires, claiming to have left after his mother came to Cole's door. He said that they had originally stopped by because Cole had told them he had acid at his trailer, but when they went over to drop some hits, all he wanted to talk about was music. The teens weren't arrested immediately, and in the days following the murder, Evan bragged to others about his involvement. Cole's wallet was put back in his trailer before the secondary arson investigation began, and it was later recovered. However, his driver's license had been thrown into a river by Evan Miller. A crime is like a puzzle. Each connection helps reveal the big picture, and it's a thrill to put it all together. When I'm not thinking about true crime, my brain still craves a challenge. That's why I love Best Fiends. If you aren't playing Best Fiends, you're missing out. You don't even need it.